Hello everyone, and thank you for attending today's presentation titled Searching for Lost Epics, Tracing the Forgotten Tales of Thebes Through Literary Reconstruction. My name is Miguel Carvalho Branch, and I'll be presenting this topic today. So basically, this starts with an important question. How can we reconstruct a lost story, a myth that is not directly available to us? There are many such stories in the antiquity, but usually they appeared in texts that are not available to us. So, I proposed when I wrote my master thesis that they are not entirely lost, but that we can reconstruct those stories through indirect access. I mean, other authors in the antiquity read those said stories, they read said stories and wrote about them, and so if we get the information from their works, we can ultimately compile that information and reconstruct the original stories through second-hand knowledge of them. Based on this idea, a few years ago for my master thesis, I reconstructed this most significant part of the Trojan cycle. What I did was essentially reading over 500 textual sources, see what information they have about the Trojan cycle, then selected, I think it was 40 or 50 of the most significant ones, then crossed all their information, and this allowed me to reconstruct two significant parts of the Trojan cycle. The adventures which took place between the end of the Iliad and the beginning of the Odyssey, and the return of all the heroes, the return home of all the heroes. This worked for the Trojan cycle, but then this can lead us to a significant question. If this worked for the Trojan War, can this also work for the Theban War? The Theban War is an important case because it is arguably the second most famous war from the antiquity. There's the Trojan War, and then there's the two Theban Wars. They can arguably be considered the most important ones. Besides, their popularity was somewhat retained up to the Middle Ages, in some form or another. They were clearly not as popular as the Trojan War, but the Theban War, the two Theban Wars, to be more accurate, were very important in literature too. And we still have some significant literary productions related to them. So I started by tracing the literary sources about the Theban cycle, and they can be separated into three main categories. The first one, and the most significant one, are the works where the Theban cycle is the main subject. For example, we have some tragedies from ancient Greece, we have statues Thebite, we have many others. Then, in a second category, we can place works where the Theban War, the two Theban Wars, are referenced in some kind of significant way. For example, the Odes of Pindar, the historical library of Diodorus Siculus, also Pausanias' description of Greece. And in a third category, we can place works which provide some brief references to the Theban cycle. For example, the fragments of the lost epics where those adventures first appeared. Now, having compiled all that information, I could divide the Theban cycle into three essential parts. The first one, the adventures of Oedipus. The second is the first Theban War. And the third section would be the second Theban War. This is important because this exact same division already comes from the antiquity. There were three different epics with these three parts. The first one was the Oedipodea, the Thebite, the second the Thebes, and the third the Epigony. which had this exact same ordering and this exact same sequence. Now, what I'm going to do next is talk about each of these three sections to attempt in some very vague way, this is not very detailed, I will try to talk about these three sequences. The first one, as I already explained, are the adventures of the hero Oedipus. This is still very famous to us if you've been in classics, if you're interested in mythology. This is still very well known to us, so I do not think I have to spend much time talking about all the myth of Oedipus, but this leads us, when we confront the sources, the literary sources extant to us, a first problem instantly rises. We know that Oedipus married his own mother, but who was the mother of his male children? Was it his mother too? Was it a different woman? Depending on the source, the identity of Oedipus' consort and the identity of the woman who gave birth to the male children of Oedipus seems to vary, and there seems to be no horizontal answer to this question. And then a second problem also rises. Why did Oedipus, at the end of his reign, at some point in time, he cursed his two male children? Why did he do this? The reason behind this seems to vary widely from one textual source to another, but usually it has to do with some kind of insult that the two children did to him. And this leads us, they are cursed obviously, and then this leads us to the first part of the Theban War. The Theban War opposes the two children of Oedipus, one against the other. One is king, the other was expecting to be king that year. He did not become king, and so this led to a war. But this also leads to some information that the textual sources do not explain very well. For example, which was the brother responsible for starting the war? Depending on the literary sources, this doesn't seem to be very stable. This does not seem to be entirely important. This because ultimately they get into the war. The war always ends in a similar way, and we'll see it later. But the important element is that the two brothers are somehow responsible for the war. Then, since they are going to fight, they need 6 heroes to support them, and we'll get to that in the next slide. But for now, we just need to see that there are 14 very significant heroes in this whole confrontation. Also, before the war itself started, there seems to be a very important episode, which is that of the necklace of Harmonia, which is given to bribe the wife of one of the heroes who joins the war. This episode seems to have been very significant in the basically in the period before the start of the first Theban War. Now, as we know, Thebes had 7 gates, and the whole strategy of this war is having 7 heroes protecting the city, one at each gate, and 7 heroes attacking it, also one at each gate. We know that 2 of the heroes were Eteocles and Polynices, the 2 sons of Oedipus. And so, as you can see here, they fight each other. This is a very significant part of the war, and eventually they even kill each other in combat. But these are only 2 heroes. Who were the 12 others? This is a problem, a massive problem, when it comes down to attempting to reconstruct the Theban War. As we confront the sources, the literary sources we have, and we compare and contrast them, we can see that Capaneus, Thebes, and the Fieraus are well established in tradition, and they appear as heroes, as attacking heroes, in almost all the literary sources. Adrastus also appears very, very significantly, but he doesn't always appear, and this is an important hero because Adrastus is the only attacker who survives the war. Now, you could be wondering, why are Thebes, Capaneus, and the Fierau important? I considered many potential options. The most relevant ones here is that they also appear in some way referenced in the Homeric poems. And so that tradition appears to have been very old, and perhaps through the importance of the Homeric poems, they could have been fixed, they could have been set in tradition very early. Now, we do not know who all the 14 heroes were, or all the 12 heroes, if you do not consider the two brothers. But we know something a bit strange, which is, even if you consider the same author, such as Euripides, two of his plays have different constitutions for the armies of the First Theban War, meaning that even one author, at one set period of time, was already familiar with the idea that there was not just one catalogue of heroes, but there were at least 2 different catalogues. Why did this happen? I'll focus on it in just a minute. But for now, it seems that reconstructing the First Theban War would be a difficult task, because there is not a completely set in stone catalogue of heroes. And so the 12 heroes surrounding the city and fighting one another cannot be easily determined for the oldest sources. Now, this gets us to the Second Theban War. This one took place 10 years after the previous one, and we know, this is very, very famous, this information, that the attackers of the city in the Second War were the sons of the heroes of the first one. But who were they? I mean, if we cannot determine who the heroes of the First War were, we cannot determine either who the heroes of the Second War would be, because they are the sons. We know, for example, that, and this is a very curious aspect, that Adrastus, who survived the first attack, had his own son die in the Second War, while all the other 6 sons survived the entire war. Was this intended? This can lead us all to an idea, to a potential idea, that perhaps the Second Theban War was just a rehash of the first one, basically a copy with constant references to the old war, but with a different outcome. Perhaps, for example, perhaps a hero who was victorious in combat before now is instead defeated, a defender hero perhaps. We have no idea about this. What we know, what is absolutely indisputable, is that Thebes was finally conquered by the attackers in the Second War. But little else is known. Even if you consider some of the biggest sources we have, like Pseudo-Apollodorus library, the confrontation in this Second War, is not explained very well, and we never get a lot of information about the attack, about particular events in the war. And this leads us to the conclusion: can the Theban cycle be reconstructed through the same way I once reconstructed the Trojan cycle? I believe it can't, for three major reasons. The first one is that we have too few literary sources, and the sources we have present conflicting information at some important spots. For example, the catalogue of heroes. If we don't know who the heroes were, we cannot try to reconstruct their adventures. Second of all, there are some iconographical evidence for the Theban cycle, and they can attest some episodes, I've shown some before, but they cannot tell us the whole story. And so if the literary sources do not tell us any significant story or a complete story, the iconographical evidence remain a bit incomplete and a bit unfulfilling. And also this is a very important aspect, is that Pausanias, the Greek geographer, states at one point in his famous work that there were at least two versions of the Theban cycle. This may explain why we have some difficulty reconstructing the story. Maybe some authors were familiar with one version, other authors were familiar with a different version, and this leads to the problem that there is not just one catalog, but at least two different catalogs of heroes, which became confused across time and led people to many difficulties. This finishes today's presentation. Does anyone have any questions or something?